either, after now, yeah, shall we begin?
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this fireside chat on fashion in the metaverse. Today, we're here at Central St. Martin's University of the Arts, London, hosted by CSM Fashion, Office of the Dean, and MA Innovation Management.
So I think before we start off, it's really, really important that we acknowledge the enormous privilege we have being here in a university, able to speak freely while there are so many in the Ukraine, especially in universities, who are taking up arms to defend themselves. So as university students, I think it's really important, as everybody should realize it's very important, but to be here is a privilege. On a less somber note, my name is Amon. I am a special project consultant for the Dean at Central St. Martin's. I work primarily in corporate partnerships and digital innovation. I also work as a tutor and a guest lecturer.
And I'm Mimi, Associate Lecturer at MA Innovation Management here at CSM. For those of you who don't know, MA Innovation Management is a course that works with students who are passionate about developing creative strategies to drive innovation and transformative change in an uncertain world. It's our great pleasure to introduce our incredible guest today, and we're really lucky to have you here with us. First, we have Kathleen Brightman, co-founder and CEO of Tezos. Next, we have Lucy McGuire, trends editor at Vogue in Business. And of course, Andrew Kigel, who's joining us from Canada, co-founder and CEO of tokens.com and chairman of the Metaverse Group.
So I don't think we do any of our guests very much justice if we didn't let them introduce themselves as well. So Kathleen, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Yeah, no, I think Mimi hit the punchline, which is that I co-founded a cryptocurrency with my husband a few years ago. I guess, the reason that I'm here is because obviously the cryptocurrency space has kind of been intersecting with digital art over the last 2 years in a pretty significant way, mostly through the form of NFTs. So NFT is an acronym, non-fungible token. It's basically just a receipt of ownership on a blockchain, which is basically a peer-to-peer network that forces unicity in a ledger of account for some sort of digital currency. This is a really simple idea, but people have kind of taken it and run crazy, and now they've globbed it onto metaverse things. And so I feel like there's a lot to unpack today, and I hope you have a better understanding of the technology that I'm a credible voice on, and less so about fashion, which I am not a credible voice on. So I'll leave it to the other panelists. So thanks very much, but that's my spiel.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy, as Mimi mentioned. So I'm coming at this more from the fashion side. So I've been at Vogue Business now for around 3 years, but over the course of the last year, pretty much 80% of my job is talking about NFTs, the metaverse. And that's because fashion brands increasingly are, delving into the metaverse, delving into NFTs. And for the most part, they're kind of dipping their toe, but there's still a lot of mysticism around these kind of technologies and how they can intersect with fashion and actually make it a better industry, potentially.
Thanks. Andrew?
Thanks. So my background's a little bit different, also really not deep in the fashion space, but I was an investment banker for 20 years. I became a crypto entrepreneur about 6 years ago. And recently our company has made news by purchasing a lot of virtual real estate in the metaverse and specifically in the fashion district. We've received some additional attention because we're hosting later in March 24th to 27th, the Metaverse Fashion Week on our land. Some of those names were disclosed recently, and it's Dolce & Gabbana, Cavalli, a lot of really high-end luxury brands. And so there's been a lot of interest into what does a Metaverse fashion show look like, why are brands entering the Metaverse, and what can be expected from that.
Thank you. So yeah, I wanted to actually dig into that and start maybe with that. So according to the recent article in FT, Metaverse Group invested 2.5 million into digital catwalks. And that kind of links to what you mentioned. So the first Metaverse Fashion Week in the Central Land, with the likes of, as you mentioned, Dolce & Gabbana, Cavalli, and also Etro. Can you share with us some details about the project? How is it going and how is it evolving?
Yeah, the project is going really, really well. There's going to be a lot of very cool immersive experiences. it's modeled after a London Fashion Week. So there's going to be after parties and catwalks, new fashion on display. And what's interesting is that the amount of brands that have come to us and have decided to participate is huge. I mean, I think there's over 30 brands that have wanted to participate. And we, at this point, we're turning, people away from, being part of the fashion show in that way. And what I think it has to do with, and I'd love to hear from the other panelists, but I think it has to do with the brands are trying to figure out new ways of accessing this new demographic, because the normal forms of advertising have really been flipped. Like, people don't really watch TV anymore the way that I used to when I was young. They're reading less magazines, they're shopping in person less, everything is being done online. And it's, how do they consume information? Like, how does my daughter who's 9, how does she learn the difference between Gucci and the Gap? She gets that information from online media, social media, metaverses. And I think that the brands are seeing this as more than just a way to sell goods, but a way to sort of create longevity for their brands.
That actually leads in really, really well too. Kathleen, do you feel like in the NFT space, there's a grab in fashion towards kind of legitimacy? You recently worked on a project with LVMH. Do you feel like that is something that's going to kind of move forward in kind of a traditional fashion sense, or do you think that it's kind of going to go off and do its own thing?
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting because I guess the Tezos blockchain has been chosen by a few different fashion brands. So it's gone from everything from like LVMH, portfolio companies, to the Gap, which is kind of like the opposite of that. I think it's kind of the concept of a Veblen good, which in economics, like basically something that appreciates in prices as valuable as it gets, is like a distinctively NFT phenomenon that maps really well to like the regular world. And in some ways, a lot of the early NFT like headlines have been like, oh, see how much money like people got for his first work ever being sold, right? And that's like very much, it instantly became a collector's item because he instantly became one of the most, highest grossing artists in history. And so it's interesting about like kind of looking into the way luxury fashion groups go into this is like, does that hold? Exactly what utility are you providing? Like, where does this access? Is this something that you just publish on Instagram? And like, what's the end all be all? And so I think like what's cool is to see, Roblox and Fortnite and all these other places kind of take up arms and try to, sort of create some sort of strategy around it that's coherent. I think ultimately, like luxury brands in the sort of analog world have a massive advantage because they have name recognition, but there's no sort of like native digital designer that can kind of post up and be like the Beeple-esque, kind of equivalent. So it's interesting. I mean, I don't know how well any of this maps to one another, but like certainly name brand recognition is a big part of the value that these brands accrue. And so I don't think that's going away anytime soon. With the Gap project, for example, it sort of leaned into the fact that Gap is kind of like an everyman brand, and everyone knows the Gap sweater. Everyone's had it, no matter how old or young you are. Like at some point, your mom gave you a Gap sweater, and so it's kind of interesting to see like do you pivot or do you kind of go back? But I mean, Lucy, it probably has her finger more on the pulse on this than I do. So eager to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way that you compare because with a lot of NFTs perhaps in the art space, it is about accruing value, and they do go for millions and millions. I think in the luxury fashion space, sometimes the goal is actually accessibility and affordability. Right. It's broadening the consumer base, and actually, these younger consumers who are maybe really interested in crypto, really interested in NFTs, aren't able to buy a bag from Vuitton, but maybe they can buy an NFT. And it's that kind of thing where, you can build brand familiarity, brand fidelity in the NFT space by people feeling like they own a bit of a brand of Gucci, for example. And then when they become affluent, maybe when they're older, they then have that brand fidelity and buy the products too in real life for thousands of dollars or pounds.
Well, one of the cheeky things that we say in our office is like, the true unbanked are like the under 18s. How do they actually like get preferences? And part of that my hook is kind of like the crypto aspect of this. Crypto is kind of a gateless financial ecosystem. And in some ways, there's a natural affinity for NFTs and fashion as a result of that. It's inherently very young. Yeah.
Lucy, you wrote an article about what crypto billionaires are going to be wearing, which is hilarious.
I know it's something I never thought I would write either.
Amazing, but so funny. Do you feel like those kinds of people are going to be the same kind of people that are buying into metaverse fashion now, or do you feel like there are kind of very separate in the way that they conduct themselves.
It's interesting. There's sort of two sides to it, because first of all, when speaking to these like young crypto investors that have made a lot of money very quickly, part of what we were talking about was what they want to wear in the physical world, and a lot of that was kind of modest. Like they'll maybe get a Fear of God Essentials hoodie, and like that's like one of them like just collects those. But then what they were actually investing in was watches, sneaker collections, things that accrue value in the same way that crypto might or NFTs might. And it was this real shift towards investment. And I think we're seeing that across the luxury industry from all consumers, but particularly those that have affinities in the crypto space. But then the other side of things was, this thought of, investing in digital fashion, etc. Most of the ones that I spoke to, they weren't really there yet in terms of, investing in digital fashion rather than physical goods. But it's just that maybe in the physical world, they want comfort. They want like physical things that are going to accrue value. And then in the digital space, they can play around a little bit more, be a little bit more adventurous. But they're not going to be, maybe they would buy a ball gown in the metaverse, but they want their hoodies and their tracksuits to trade their crypto in their bedrooms and make millions of dollars.
Fair enough.
But that leads me to the kind of when you said like they would buy different clothes in a physical world, and then they would be more experimental in the metaverse world. So I think in the most recent interview, Mark Zuckerberg said that he predicts that we will spend the same amount of money on our wardrobe in the metaverse and our physical wardrobe. And my question is like, okay, so where are we going to spend this money? Are we going to spend this money on our digital clothes for Zoom calls and Instagram, or for our crazy avatars that are walking around the central land? Yeah,
it's interesting. I think that at the minute, fashion brands are toying with this. They're toying with whether they create digital collections that are digital twins of imagery in the real world, or whether they create completely different collections in the metaverse and then have the physical clothing. And they're doing it both ways. I think that it could be really great if maybe the metaverse, really fueled the trend cycle and trend happened in the metaverse and we were able to be really adventurous and really eccentric almost with our fashion there. And then actually the trend cycle slowed down in the physical world. That could be a great way for things to go. Consumption maybe would reduce in the physical world because people are wearing neutral, comfortable clothing. But then it could go the other way, because we don't know that the metaverse isn't going to introduce the trend cycle in the physical world too and speed it up even further, like we saw with things like TikTok, where things are moving at the speed of light. It could take that even to a step further.
Yeah, but I was thinking that instead of buying another jumper for my Zoom call, I would just buy a digital version of it and just have 2 cashmere jumpers in my wardrobe.
I think that part of the
one of the things to be considered is often when people are buying things in the metaverse that they're wearing, it's for status reasons. And so, if you're on Instagram, you might take a picture of your food or where you're on vacation, but in the metaverse, a way of sort of communicating status might be by showing up with your NFT running shoes or a Gucci handbag or whatever that is. And I don't think that should be overlooked, and that, to borrow a term from the art world, provenance, which is the origin, authenticity, and purchase history of a good, you can perfectly find that in the metaverse worlds that are built on blockchains. That creates a lot of value because you can buy a pair of running shoes or a handbag that's a designer brand name. You create status for yourself by wearing it. You can store it, but you can also resell it. And those internal economies that are created within these metaverses have a lot of appeal to people, because you're not just buying it and then it's sort of discarding it like you might on, some other, things that you have digitally. You can keep them and they have value that you can resell. And I think that's important.
Yeah, that chimes with gaming skins, doesn't it? I know that I have a nephew, and I did a story about Balenciaga collaborating with Fortnite. And, he's 7, he lives in the north of England. He's not a luxury consumer or even has an awareness of luxury. I walked into his house at Christmas, and the first thing he said to me was, "Oh my God, Balenciaga Fortnite. You wrote about Balenciaga Fortnite." That kid now knows what Balenciaga is. And it's because they created value for him within Fortnite, which is like a universe that he understands and loves, And I think, these gaming skins really prove that out, that, it can create status. So if luxury brands are all about status and they want that in the metaverse, like that's a great blueprint.
Yeah. Status is one angle, and then another one is like maybe fantasy. So there's things you can pull off in Fortnite that you can't pull off IRL. Part of the reason we wear hoodies is that they're comfortable. And part of the reason, we all can't fit into like half the stuff that's on a runway is because we're human. And this is kind of, it bridges that gap. And I think okay, there's one axis of this, which is just like oh, Mark Zuckerberg changed the name of Facebook to Meta, and like now we all care about like what we look like in video games that we don't actually play. But the other part of this is like, how do we indulge our fantasies? And I think that's like a human prevailing thing that goes into storytelling, and a lot of the stuff that we don't really have good limitations for in the web quite yet, because like we kind of transitioned over the last 2 years to like living digitally. And I don't think we've kind of like broken out of like, oh, well, if I wear a hoodie in Fortnite, maybe people will recognize me when they see me in person. Like maybe they're never going to know you.
Yeah.
And there's not that much indulgence of fantasy that I've seen. It's been mostly been like, oh, how do we kind of like reconcile with the fact that like retail is dying,
I can buy the Louboutins, the digital ones, because I don't have to wear them.
Yeah, exactly.
To wear high heels.
It's interesting that you say, you can go past the limits though, because Roxander, the London-based brand, did an NFT recently for a show. And when the Institute of Digital Fashion started working with her, they kind of showed her a dress that she'd already designed for the actual show in the real world. And then they were like, okay, you can do whatever you want with this now. Yeah. And there's no gravity limitations. There's no proportional limitations, like anything. And it took her a little while to get used to, but the reason that they wanted to sort of bring a designer into the world is because at the minute, the fashion in the metaverse like needs some work. It needs that like creativity bring into it.
I mean, like I just saw like Harris Reed show. I'm like, the only place where I'm going to be pulling this off is the metaverse. Like, yeah. But I think that whole element is like really missing. I think it's actually a huge appeal to like why cryptocurrencies are interesting as well. It's like it's at the very much at the heart of storytelling, like what is possible and like stretching the boundaries and kind of rethinking it. I think it's a useful tool potentially for like prototyping and maybe like getting an understanding of what your demographic is. But ultimately, if we're talking about this in the context of gaming and stuff, like the demography doesn't lie. Like you don't have a lot of people who cross over that much. Balenciaga, I guess, is a good exception.
Yeah.
Andrew, I think that brings up a good point. Do you see different companies kind of approaching your Metaverse Fashion Week in a different way? Or do you kind of see the same approach for everybody? So is it more of a gamification, or is it more kind of an art world point of view, which, I think both are used in fashion, but I'm interested to hear what you kind of see more of.
Everybody's trying to figure it out. This hasn't been done before. And so, we always talk about we're making history as we go through this. I think that there's a few important things. I had a conversation with the CEO of one of the top 3 running shoe companies in the world. And he was like, well, how much money will we make? And we had a whole conversation about why, I don't believe initially this is about making money or sales. It's about, again, promoting and advertising your brand. The other key area to consider is for a lot of the brands is how to translate this from the metaverse or NFT sales to the real world. And so that's why one of the things that's being incorporated into the Fashion Week is when there's the virtual avatars walking down the runway, you'll be able to click on them. They're going to be sort of double the size, so they'll be larger than the other people around it, but you'll be able to click on the avatar wearing the clothes, and it'll give you an option to say, oh, you can buy this for your avatar, or click here and it redirects you to the company's website to look at the physical good or something similar to that. And so this is the sort of the crossover, and I think it's the end goal for a lot of these companies is not just to, again, create sales of NFTs, but to bring people and create real customers, or I should say customers for the physical goods as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think luxury brands have been trying to make fashion shows shoppable in one way or another for a really long time with live streams and see now, buy now, and lots of different things. But I feel like that's a really great interactive user journey, which could be really interesting.
And there's far more from the gaming world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's amazing now is that I think every single brand in the world is coming up with a metaverse strategy, whereas this was kind of like a year ago, nobody was even talking about this. I mean, every day there's a new launch, like Jimmy Choo shoes, or there's always something every day, and it doesn't matter if you're a luxury brand or something like the Gap, more the every person brand. Every single company in the world, in the fashion world, is coming up with a metaverse strategy right now.
And often hiring metaverse teams, right? Balenciaga's got a metaverse unit now. Tommy Hilfiger, I think, is launching one. There's various.
LVMH is massive.
Yeah,
massive.
That's the thing, like building out teams, like that's showing it's a real strategic pillar of businesses now, rather than just a marketing ploy. But
there are some still brands that are resistant to that.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2015, every bank had a blockchain division, but like that amounted to nothing. So not to like rain on anyone's parade here, but just like it is the case, like when something is new, it's novel, and it's like really easy to like hang your hat on like, oh man, FOMO, we got to get in. I think like, it's telling that there's like very little traction in actual usage of like NFTs beyond just like basically bragging rights among like a lot of early Ethereum folks. So it's like, if you actually look at the substance of a lot of this, it is kind of hard to argue that it's a paradigm shift. More so, it's a more interesting and creative way to think about digital ownership on the web that like I think is going to require a lot of experimentation in order to find its like product market fit.
And I mean the application that you mentioned before with prototyping, that kind of thing I think is really interesting because that could really transform the fashion industry, and that's got real utility to it, right? If you do your sampling virtually, and even your buying appointments virtually, like that kind of thing, like not making those samples that could potentially become dead stock.
Well, there's also like at least in the crypto space, which again I'm like a one-trick pony. That's the only thing I know how to think creatively about. You have this idea of like, well, what are blockchains good for? They're good at basically adjudicating and basically coming to coordination on like something that's potentially contentious. And things like collaboration is usually a good way to think about that, which is why it's a potentially useful way to think about ownership across different platforms. But again, it's hairy. It's going to be ripe with bugs. It's going to be very awkward. I just, all I know is, how to recognize patterns. And I do think, the fact that this like has gone up so quickly does give me essences of a lot of the early cryptocurrency and blockchain applications that got, hundreds of millions of dollars in investment and largely amounted to like, playing around in a lab and people patting themselves on the back of the So.
I have a question about, we talked about, but this is very interesting for me, the customer base of all of these activities that we're seeing right now. So of course, like the customer base of luxury brands are, I don't know, I would say likes like my mom, because like, she can afford or she kind of wants to buy, I don't know, Gucci bags, Gucci shoes and things like that. If you look at the demographics of blockchain kind of users or adopters, it's male dominated still. And they quite, I don't know, older in terms of, I'd say they're like 30 plus around that. So they invested, they also have enough wealth to invest in crypto in 2017. They earn a lot of money out of that. And then this is why they have money to. So for me, there are two different groups of people. Whereas when we're seeing all of these Jimmy Choos and all of these Balenciagas entering that, who is buying these clothes? Who is buying these NFTs?
It's interesting. I think, I'm drawing on the Roxander example again, just because that's one of the most recent ones I've reported on, but they actually made it the NFT purchasable in pounds on the brand's e-commerce site. And that was the first time I've seen that before. I don't know if you've seen that before.
That's pretty normal, actually. Even so, most NFT platforms really struggle to attract women. Women are inordinately both like comically underrepresented both in like the purchasing and the creation side of the house. So I think it's like less than 5% or something of like NFT revenues go to women. So I mean, we're talking about it like a very female dominated industry to the best of my knowledge. But that's very much not like this new terrain. So
yes, that's why brands are trying to sell them in different ways rather than like on an NFT platform, for example, maybe.
Because I don't see my mom having a MetaMask and sitting there and like, buying NFT drops of Burberry.
Well, I mean, just saying the quiet part out loud, like the most successful NFT like phenomenons have been, basically things that have marketed themselves as lottery tickets. Wink, wink, but not really a lottery ticket. But look at how much this guy resold it for. And so like if all the press is telling you about like if you buy this, you can flip it for like X return. Like that's going to attract a certain demography. It's going to be overwhelmingly male, and because it is most akin to gambling, which is like very much more of a male pastime than a female pastime. So like I just think like the culture is kind of setting us up for this by advertising, big returns on this NFT thing. Like, what do you think is a good NFT to invest in? And it's very compelling language. Like it's done because it's true. But I do think like the tone that's cast between like when you talk to big conservative brands and when you talk to someone who's like a little bit more desperate is very telling.
I think that also brings up a good point when it comes to the desperateness of certain fashion brands and in terms of them being kind of more independent and on their own. I've definitely seen kind of a fork in how luxury brands deal with NFTs and the metaverse and how more independent brands deal with it. Do you think, looking from high to low, do you see the same kind of strategy, say like from Gap or LVMH, or do you see them kind of pursuing very different streams?
I'm actually not very privy to a lot of that. I co-founded this cryptocurrency, but a lot of this is maintained by like business development people in the Tezos ecosystem. I think choosing Tezos as a blockchain is a sign of great taste. So I would never besmirch these people regardless of their strategies. But I think basically it's an interesting tell, right? Like, who are you trying to market to, and like what language do you use? And I think I'm really proud of all the things that have touched the Tezos ecosystem, because I think it's more like cultivating grassroots, fervor and fandom, and kind of uniting these people with NFT strategies, rather than like, oh, look at how much this is resold for, which has been like a lot of the driver for a lot of the art on platforms that are a bit more popular, I'd say. Yeah.
Interesting. Kind of switching topics. Andrew, why Decentraland?
So we invest actually across 6 different metaverses, and we're constantly looking at new ones. So Decentraland just happened to get a lot of attention because we did a very large transaction there. But we like Decentraland because it's very easy to access. In terms of the graphics are good enough that they can be accessed via many types of computers, as opposed to some of the higher end metaverses where you need like a really great graphics card and a gaming computer. They also have a fashion area, and we knew from talking to the people at Decentraland that fashion was going to be a key focus for them this year. So really, we were trying to capitalize on the fact that we knew that they were going to be holding this big fashion show. And we knew that I believe we're the largest landowner in the fashion district of Decentraland, which today I believe happens to have some of the largest visitor traffic growth rates. They grew by their growth rate by over 3,000% last year. And just to talk a little bit about what we were talking before, I do view the metaverses as being, I know they're built on NFTs and it's the same technology, but I do view them as being different than just sort of a buy this NFT and maybe it'll go up. What's being created in these metaverses right now are these experiences, these immersive experiences. And I think the reason that Facebook converted to Meta to do the largest rebrand in history is because these metaverses are the next iteration of social media and the next iteration of gaming. And if you look at what's happening with all the Web3 convergence, you're seeing video games moving to metaverses. You're seeing social media moving to metaverses. You go to Decentraland, you can add friends. Back last October, Decentraland held a big EDM concert. It had some of the top DJs in the world, 8 stages. I went to it. I mean, if you could imagine, going to like Coachella or some other big music festival, that's kind of what it felt like on your computer, where you could talk to people and dance. That event attracted over 50,000 unique visitors. And so I do think that it goes beyond just having a collectible and hoping it goes up in value. I think what's drawing people into these metaverses is these experiences. And when we hold the fashion show, I think that'll attract upwards of 500,000 people. Why? I think there's going to be a curiosity factor when you hear that, the Dolce & Gabbana or the Tommy Hilfiger show is on. You're going to click through there. One of the things we like about Decentraland is that you can click and you can be on for, as long as you have a computer, it's free to join. Takes less than a minute to create your avatar and be there and watch it. So I think there's going to be a big curiosity factor for a lot of people to go in and check out what this looks like.
I think as well with luxury, what I've noticed certainly over the last 5 years is that there's a real move towards this I was there, like tying yourself to a cultural time and place. So whether that's you were at the right streetwear drop, you were at a concert and you got the merch, I think the luxury consumers are really looking to tie themselves culturally to other people. And there's this thing that we talk about a lot with Gen Z where it's like collective individualism. So they want to be unique. So maybe, be their own avatar in a metaverse, but say that they were there and share the experience with other people. So I think there's definitely that experiential factor to the metaverse as well. And with Decentraland.
Yeah. And, let's not forget about music and celebrities. I mean, during this fashion show, there's going to be after parties. I can't disclose the musical guests yet, but these are going to be some of the top DJs and musical artists in the world who are going to be participating. So I do think it's about creating these immersive experiences where people can go and participate. And just like you might at a concert, you might want to buy a t-shirt or some merchandise that you can take back with you.
I have issues with this kind of closed environments of these metaverses, because it kind of like looks like there's an oligopoly of this different meta. There's a Snoop Dogg metaverse, the Decentraland with the fashion district, Sotheby's there as well, JP Morgan is there as well, but there's Sandbox as well, and there's another one. And whoever I'm speaking to, they're building their own metaverse now. but they're kind of close clusters, and then you have to choose. So like, I understand that this will become a new social media, but I have to choose which cluster I am joining. Otherwise, I'm just myself.
You don't have to choose. I use Facebook, I use LinkedIn, and I use Instagram. Those are all different forms of social media. And as they have evolved over the last few years, I evolve with it. You know, my daughter likes TikTok. Some people like Snapchat. So I think there's going to be many metaverses. They're all going to succeed. Some will be more focused on fashion and music. Some will be commerce. Some will be education. I believe this technology is going to slowly evolve into many aspects of our lives, and they're going to stop being called the metaverse. Just like you don't say, I'm going to go onto the internet. They're just going to go on and say, oh, I'm going to go check this out. I'm going to go join my class or visit some people or check out this concert. And you'll just go on to various metaverses where you'll have accounts.
Kathleen, do you think that you're going to see the same kind of agglomeration in cryptocurrencies and blockchain companies as you see in big tech otherwise? Or do you think that, like Andrew says, it's going to keep quite separate and decentralized? I mean, that was the initial kind of focus around cryptocurrency and blockchain, is to keep things decentralized, but it seems to not.
Yeah, fair. Good question. 5 years ago, I think, well, I should just qualify that the Tezos position paper from 2014 talks about it being the last cryptocurrency, which it clearly isn't. So it's a completely different, universe we live in, mostly because on most smart contract platforms, Ethereum, Tezos, Algorand, Avalanche, all these things, basically spinning up your own token is very simple. It's usually there's like a library or a suite that allows you to do this almost instantaneously. So there's a lot of currencies that exist in the world, and there are going to be many, many more. I think, our take on it is that right now, this has been a lot of narrative building. It's been a lot of promising on the technology that is actually not tremendously well used. NFTs have been a huge sort of gateway smart contract for people because finally they're actually interacting with the technology. But for a really long time, blockchains were basically a solution in search of a problem in many ways. And that's been the way that they've been ridiculed in the press, right, for the last 5 or 6 years. And I think NFTs are kind of interesting because they allow people to actually use these things. But by and large, the experience of it has become, pretty differentiated between different blockchains. And so I think as we kind of move forward and it's less about kind of the story around the underlying technology, it's more about the, technical experience. I think that's what's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. To Andrew's point, when I log on to Gmail and I send an email, I don't think, I sure do hope TCP/IP is working today. No one thinks about the internet protocols. They think about the applications that sit on top of them. And in some ways that's social phenomenon. In some ways it's just going towards what's most efficient and what's better done. I think right now there's a bit of culture has kind of ascended before technology has met up with it, and so you have a bunch of hilarious crypto snafus as a result of this. I think we're sometimes tragic, mostly funny, but I think basically as the space matures, that there's going to be a convergence towards technical quality, and there's only so many ecosystems that have really been able to foster that type of excellence. Obviously, I'm very biased. I think Tezos is one of them. But for the time being, a lot of this has been a bunch of clown cars that have fallen into a lot of gold mines. To quote, Mark Zuckerberg talking about Jack Dorsey. So it's a lot of hype and talk now. But I do think there's a convergence towards quality that will happen when the technology actually has to be tested and actually used by people outside of its existing ecosystem or initial ecosystem.
Okay. Since we're in a fashion institution, fashion university, I wanted to kind of look back to that. So, Tezos actually is one, played a big part in NFT art, promoting new NFT artists. So we see a new wave of generative art, AI artists that are promoted now by Sotheby's, Christie's. So there is, let's say, a paradigm shift already in the art world. There's a new wave of artists in the art world. What about fashion? Are we going to see a new wave of fashion designers on Web3?
Well, there's already a few examples. So the Fabricant is one of the biggest ones, or Artifact. So the Fabricant launched a couple of years ago and is a digital first fashion brand. And largely quite successful, not to the level of an LVMH or a Kering brand as of yet. But I think that there is space for this. But I think first of all, a lot of change has to happen in the existing fashion industry and luxury space in order to change consumer mindset so that there's an appetite in the wider world. Because, you know, like you were saying before, the sort of crypto metaverse communities, well, for the metaverse, it skews very young because it's, you know, kids that are used to gaming and used to that environment that are now graduating to metaverse as they become available. Or it's crypto where it's, you know, largely male dominated or that slightly older consumer, maybe not with roots in the luxury space. So I think that the luxury fashion industry needs to sort of set precedents before and change consumer mindset, and then there can be more demand for these digital first fashion brands. But at the moment as well, you know, I think that luxury fashion players should lean more on these digital first designers, digital first marketplaces like DressX, you know, or even, I mean, Nike acquired Artifact, the virtual sneaker company, which was a massive show of support, but also maybe a show of fear that, you know, these digital first, these virtual fashion players are coming for the existing brands.
I think that brings up an interesting point about the kind of demographics. We kind of talked about this before, but, you know, there is a very different kind of demographic, and maybe there's more of an overlap between the kind of fine art buyer and the kind of person who would then buy an NFT than there would be necessarily with the traditional kind of person who would buy fashion and the person who would kind of buy an NFT. So do you feel like that is, you know, better placed at the moment? Do you think they're going to converge at any point?
I think that what brands are trying to do now, you know, like, for example, making NFTs available on their e-commerce site in pounds, like that kind of thing, I think is trying to, you know, help change the consumer and bring the luxury consumer into this space. But there's still a way to go. And I think to your point earlier, you know, there's maybe not one central metaverse or one central NFT marketplace or one central platform that luxury consumers know of as of yet. I think it's still very much in the discovery phase, and brands are kind of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks with their consumers. But it's interesting because it's kind of half of it's an acquisition tool, right? Half of it is to reach new consumers who exist in that space as a luxury brand. And then the other half is not alienating the consumers that you already have. So it's kind of towing the line between both. And I think they're still all exploring that at the moment.
We don't have like a fashion OpenSea, right? Yet.
They just use normal.
So I can just go and browse Dolce & Gabbana, Burberry NFTs in one marketplace.
Well, different brands have been choosing different platforms. So whether it's...
Andrew, that's something for you.
We've looked at that. Yeah, that's a competitive space. I like owning the land and hosting parties instead of creating marketplaces, but yes.
So Kathleen, do you, as you move forward with Tezos and the kind of collaborations that you do, you've worked with Art Basel quite recently. Do you find that the people that you've dealt with in the art world are very different than the kind of fashion people you've dealt with?
I mean, again, you know, I'm kind of like a step away from this, so I'd be kind of speaking out of turn if I were to opine on it at length. But I think basically, like, you know, people who come from industries outside of the cryptocurrency space tend to have the same disposition, which is like usually a very sincere desire to like understand what the technology does and how they can incorporate it into their brand in a very sincere way, which is always very nice. And also, you know, basically, what I've also found is like people are afraid of delving into this and like rupturing or alienating their existing like base. Like they want to show that they're, you know, on the vanguard, and they want to show that they know what they're talking about with the new technology. But they're also like, usually if they have something to defend, they want to defend it. And I think it's about being tasteful usually. You know, I think like the Basel Miami, you know, booth that the Tezos Foundation put on was really exceptionally good because it wasn't trying to like, you know, showcase like NFTs that were sold for X amount or anything like that. It actually allowed you to make your own NFT at the booth. And like, I think 5,000 people went through that process, and it took about 20 seconds on average. And there were people who were in their 70s and people who were like 7 years old doing it all on their smartphones. And I think that's great because like that basically takes a very intimidating technology and it reduces it to like an experience that you had. And immediately you can see like the sort of fear being diffused immediately, which is fabulous. So I think like that's kind of what we wanted to cultivate with that is like, you know, a lot of people are afraid of this technology because it's new, it's got a lot of fantastic headlines around it. But at the end of the day, like cryptocurrencies are accounting software. When I want to like shut down a conversation immediately in a cab or something like that, I'll say like, what do you work in? I'm like, oh, accounting software. And everyone goes to sleep because like no one finds that interesting. And so, you know, I think there's a little bit of like making this real to people so that they're less afraid. And that's like a big theme.
Art Basel had to bring had to bring NFTs into a physical space though for people to actually be able to relate to it. Do you think that's what's necessary for more adoption?
I think like having very accessible software and tooling around this is kind of the killer app, or like what's going to make it interesting to people. Right now it's very intimidating. I think Mimi was talking about her MetaMask, like, oh, I have to drop down. It's like it's kind of clunky. But kind of reducing it to something that you make yourself in 20 seconds or less, and it just appears, in a browser on your smartphone. That's about as simple as you're going to get. I mean, we just converted all ourselves to QR codes over the last 2 years. So I think like that's a baseline level of accessibility that we're all kind of striving for.
Amazing. I think that's a perfect endpoint to moving on to questions. So please, anybody have a question? Raise their hand. What do you mean by it's not to make money, but it's to get customers? So the question was for Andrew. So it's earlier you were talking about NFT space and then about making money, about getting customers.
The brands, yeah. So the question is like when you mentioned like,
yeah, if you could read the question.
Did you hear the question?
I didn't.
Okay, so let me just repeat it. So when you mentioned that when you spoke to one of the brands for the fashion week, and you explained to them that it's not about how much sales they'll get, how much money, but it's just about, how the awareness and bringing the customers. What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is this, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but not really. My daughter is 9 years old, and she is just starting to learn about what fashion brands represent. And you guys at a fashion school, you know that the designers are trying to make you feel a certain way by wearing their clothing, what you're representing. And so if you're talking about the younger demographic that doesn't watch TV, so they're not served commercials, they're not reading magazines anymore, like buying them, and they're doing all their shopping online, how does a brand communicate to this new generation what they represent? Like, how does my daughter figure out what Chanel is versus Banana Republic or the Gap or other clothing brands? The brands need to find a way to communicate to this generation what they represent. And so what I was saying is, for this running shoe company, is how do they compete or compare to other shoe brands? How do you access that young future consumer if they're not watching TV or receiving advertising in the way that people used to receive it? Through the metaverse and through social media, they can do that. And as a reminder, we're talking about these new metaverses that are building. Children have been using Fortnite, Minecraft, and Roblox now for several years, and there's millions of them using it. This isn't like adoption happening tomorrow. These are the future users and the people that are going to migrate from playing these games into really just feeling very comfortable being in a metaverse and using that as a form of communication, learning, socializing, and learning what to buy and what brands represent.
Thank you.
Yeah. I had a question for Andrew. Just wanted to ask that when you talk about metaverse, if I'm buying a virtual good for, say, a Gucci jacket for about USD 1350, it is still going to be closed platform, like limited to the people that I add, or is there any media metaverse strategy where it would be open and cross-platform, where people who do not sign up for being at Meta or sign up, like if we sign up for Facebook, they ask us to be part of Facebook before accessing any of the profiles. So do you think that that would be something that you would carry forward to the metaverse strategy as well?
So,
or it would be open or cross-platform?
Sorry, just for the audience online. So you're asking whether or not there's going to be more interoperability when it comes to people buying luxury items on a certain metaverse platform?
Yeah. Would it be open and cross-platform? You don't need to necessarily sign up for it.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that technology is being worked on. By the end of this year, you'll have the ability to buy an NFT wearable that you can transport through various metaverses. So that technology is coming very soon. But like I said before, when you buy an NFT from Gucci or Jimmy Choo or whatever it is, you have that provenance. You know, I often get the question, what about knockoffs? And one of the great things about the blockchain is you can see the origin history of something. So you can see that it comes from Gucci or Chanel or Nike or Adidas. And so I think that's very powerful, that you can authenticate something, where it came from, which provides you the ability to resell it later. But back to the question, yes, right now within each metaverses, you can't move the goods around. I think that interoperability will happen by the end of the year.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer.
There's this funny issue with the Hermes bag. When the guy who sold the NFT Hermes, he sued someone for making the fake NFT Hermes, and then Hermes sued him for making the NFTs because they were like, we never agreed for that. It's like, it's a change.
I think there was a Jane Birkin bag that was done, and there was 1,000 NFTs made of a Birkin bag, but it wasn't actually made. I think it's Chanel is the parent. It wasn't made by them. So I thought that was interesting that they sold out very quickly, and they, I think, carry a lot of value, even though they're not original.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
And the creator of the Meta Birkin wrote a white paper, which was hilarious. Hilarious.
Meta Birkin.
Suhair.
Thank you, guys. So I have a question about, everyone's using brand names, so Chanel, Hermes, whatever, Balenciaga. What does this do for independent fashion, young designers? How do they find voice? I know Tezos has, I don't know, however many hundreds of thousands of artists from around the world who have this platform and are being able to sell their work. But it sounds like in fashion, the power still lies with the brand names. Is that going to affect how young designers can sell digital fashion, and are there efforts to change that?
Sure. So just for the live audience, do you see, maybe it's a good question for Lucy and Kathleen, do you see, we've only really talked about brand names, do you see there's kind of a different stream for independent brands, and do you think there's more of a space for them to kind of flourish?
I mean, the beauty of software is like the cost of production is almost zero. And like what's probably prohibitive for most people who are trying to like build their own fashion label, so on and so forth, is probably cost of materials, how do they source it, labor, all these things. And so I think like if something good's going to come out of this, it's going to be, effectively a way for younger people to have access to like the quote unquote real world much more easily and much more cheaply than they ever did before, which I hope means, maybe not obviating schools, but certainly like making knowledge much more accessible, which we've already done with the internet. And also like cost of production to actually like show who you are. Like a lot of people have been very famous and set their careers on fire using the internet super early, and would have taken years, and the world would be less rich if we didn't have that talent earlier. And what's cool about NFTs is that they allow you to monetize some of the digital products and digital, output that you put into the world more easily. And that, lends itself to attention, that lends itself to creativity that we didn't have before. So but the reason I like this stuff and the reason I like cryptocurrencies is because I think it's a great place for people to find their tribe on the internet. And I think that's the nicest version of this industry.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well, because any luxury brand, whether it's an emerging designer or a bigger brand, they rely so much on their equity, right? On the community they've created, whether that's online or in real life. Very often, even for emerging designers, creating a massive runway moment, a big social media moment, a big community activation is the way that you make a name for yourself. And I think with the metaverse in its current state, it's a little bit more difficult to do that, right? But as technology is advancing, things like Decentraland are booming and adoption grows, it will be more possible to create those really impactful moments and those sort of experiential elements like within the metaverse. Maybe we're not quite there yet, but I think it's definitely coming. But for the moment, these bigger heritage luxury houses, they already have the brand equity, they already have the brand story. So then they can just translate that over and people will come to them anyway because they already have the recognition.
I'll mention one thing that I think is very cool. And if someone was to go and want to look up Chanel or Gucci or any luxury brand, obviously they're not going to allow somebody else to advertise on their webpage. What we're finding though in the metaverse, as an example, we created something called tokens.com Tower in Crypto Valley, and our neighbors are some of the largest blockchain and crypto companies in the world. We're finding something very similar with the fashion street that we're building, which is people want to know, where is Gucci building or where is this person building, so that they can build a virtual store near them. And so what happens when you go into the metaverse is that when you're wandering around, you can actually sort of see other stores and things in your periphery, and you can go check them out. I think that's really neat. And why neighborhoods matter in the metaverse, because if you're located near a place that has high visitor traffic, you're going to be able to, leverage that other person's traffic, and maybe people will wander into your virtual store, because that's where this is going now. There's going to be virtual stores manned by avatars that have real people behind them that can talk to you about their products and what they're doing. So back to the question about what does this do for local brands or up and coming brands is, in the metaverse, unlike sort of the traditional two-dimensional web page, you can put something next to Chanel and maybe it's a competing store that people can go and visit. It's a way of getting attention for yourself.
Yeah, and it's cheaper than Regent Street. Sure.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Mark?
Slightly a wider context within this, that is there some tension in the spirit of cryptocurrencies and the kind of centralization that we're seeing? So like a lot of the conversation is about the value of the land in the metaverse, which feels quite capitalist. And the World Wide Web was created as an escape from capitalism and it's leaking through websites. And Bitcoin wasn't created to be this $60,000, whatever it is, valuable currency. That as it's moved from this anti-establishment destructive tool, it's turning into another place where we're talking about the value of land in this place. And then is that then create a class structure, or is there, what is the effects of this, I guess?
I feel like that question's for me. Gonna take a guess. Yeah, I mean, like basically, so open source software is inherently like egalitarian in the sense that basically what makes Bitcoin valuable is like the assumption that other people will accept Bitcoin, right? Like it's in some ways like all currency is a collective fiction, right? And that's interesting social phenomenon, right? And so what happens as these things get more successful is like people take their own cut of it and their own interpretation of it, right? And so there's no right answer for like how to treat cryptocurrencies. And there's like a lot of differentiation between like the philosophies that come to it. I think like what's cool about gaming, what's cool about the metaverse in this conversation is that games have had their own versions of in-game economies for the last, as long as they've existed, right? What's cool about cryptocurrencies is that it allows basically walled gardens to come down in a systematic way, whether it's through the traditional financial system, whether it's through like the walled gardens of, traditional gaming outlets, so on and so forth. I think there's a novelty factor in any time that a new use case is presented with an exotic technology where people are just trying to figure it out. And that's very much like where we are in the whole, gaming plus like NFT plus crypto ? Landscape. And I think, what's going to get headlines, what's going to be attractive is like, big dollars being attributed to it. But I think ultimately what this technology does best is coordination with disparate groups on the internet. And also obviating the need for traditional walled gardens and traditional gatekeepers for people to like transact with one another online. In the greater context of human history, cryptocurrencies actually solve a problem that's pretty material, which is basically exchanging value across very long distances without the use of or risk of an intermediary. So I like to focus on that part. And yeah, I mean, like you're always going to get whatever it's a novel technology, whether there's like a lot of heavy advertising and ambiguity, you're going to get people who like rush to certain headlines and ways of phrasing it. But I think what's powerful about this is that it basically allows someone very, very far away to transact with someone else who's very far away at very little cost and without the use of, the traditional banking system.
Yeah. The industry is definitely divided. I can tell you, my prior company, I built one of the largest Bitcoin miners in North America. And I pivoted and I wrote an article for Business Insider that was published about a week ago, basically arguing that the future of crypto is not Bitcoin because of all the various things. It's Tezos and all these other programmable blockchains. They put it up on Twitter. I started receiving hate mail from like the Bitcoin maximalists. And so I do think that the community is somewhat divided and not sure where it should go. I ultimately think there's going to be a split between the Bitcoin community and then what I would call the layer ones, the programmable blockchains that things like NFTs and metaverses are being built on.
The number one reason that people who like don't like having it pointed out that like Bitcoin is an energy monster, so on and so forth, is usually that they own too much of it. So it's but like at the end of the day, cryptocurrency can be like ideologically motivated, but it's also populated by humans. And so like the traditional like greediness and stupidity that exists in every industry is prominent in this as much as anything else. It's really hard to find people who are like purely ideological in any space, and the cryptocurrency space is no different.
I'd also like to point out that whenever I'm doing a lecture on cryptocurrency or NFTs, I always have a slide where it shows energy consumption from Bitcoin, energy consumption from Ethereum, and the energy consumption from Tezos. And literally, the scale doesn't allow for there to be a bar for Tezos.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I mean, it's funny because like in 2017, I'm talking about Tezos to lots of people, and I'm like, and it's energy efficient, and they're just like, who cares? And now it's like all I talk about. So it's definitely shifted. It also means it's more popular with like common people, because I think most of polite society like thinks that man-made climate change is a thing and doesn't feel the need to like burn coal in order to secure their pretend internet money. But it's a very controversial take, and it only like kind of came to light around this time last year because the use of the Ethereum network went up so much. And like, despite having promised since 2014 that they were going to be proof of stake, Ethereum still hasn't moved to it. So it's kind of like, it's one of these things where it's like the conversation only starts when sometimes the space cannibalizes itself with its success. And that's one such instance is, the conversation around energy consumption, which has been interesting to watch.
We're seeing fashion brands comment now a lot more on which platforms they're using, how they're minting the NFTs, whether it's proof of stake or proof of work,
which
basically to try and end that debate.
Yeah, which sidesteps like a more important issue, which is that fashion is also quite bad for the environment. I think like we all like if value is subjective, and if you think that there's a right to something to exist, it's really hard to like argue on the merits of how much it takes, right?
Yeah.
But what's nice about cryptocurrency is like there's proof of work, which is designed, you basically burn electricity in order to secure the network. And then you have proof of stake, which does not do that at all. And proof of stake and proof of work, initially it was thought that proof of work was impossible to replicate proof of work with proof of stake. Now we know that we can. So it's like, well, if given the two choices, which one do you choose, given that there's no trade-off virtually? It's very telling to see people defend proof of work in that context, which might be what Andrew's point was. I didn't read your article in Business Insider.
I think we have time.
I've actually got to jump, but I would echo what you say, which is why I pivoted from proof of work, and now my company is solely focused on proof of stake protocols. So, but I just want to say thank you very much. We we've talked to your foundation. We do a lot of staking. But anyways, just want to say thank you, and I apologize, but I have to run to another meeting.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Nice to meet you.
We have one last question.
Yeah, I think there was two more questions. If you guys can make it really quick, we can go to both gentlemen with the hair.
This was like mostly this is mostly a question about Metaverse stuff. I wrote down the notes. I just wanted to. I was wondering about like what are kind of the effects, or your thoughts on the effects of like fashion, it's like mental health, these kind of things. So I kind of noted a comment you said that a lot of people find with like just sitting and with like wearing a tracksuit or whatever, as long as they look good enough. But the thing is, like, I feel like having these real kind of flying clothes, going out, dressing yourself well, having real show experiences, actually make a lot of people happy. I would just like to kind of know, do you not think this is going to head in quite a detrimental way for the next generation? Who are kind of in danger of already having sort of connected based on this whole like, it's about like instant gratification there. If they're losing reality, are people not always have zero attention span?
Okay, I'm going to summarize that for the live stream. Mental health in the metaverse, go.
So I think that, the important point about the comfort element, and staying in your room while you trade crypto or you gaming or whatever, like that's one thing, but it doesn't mean that you're just going to be locked in your room forever. It just means that maybe you're going to express yourself creatively a little bit more in the metaverse. It doesn't take away like person-to-person interaction, much like, social media revolutionized the way that we communicate, but we still communicate physically. It's kind of that comparison. I mean, I do understand what you're saying, that if people don't feel like they can express themselves and share in fashion in the real world, perhaps it would be detrimental to mental health. But I think it's just going to add a layer, much like social media did, rather than fully replacing physical experiences.
I just kind of thought, I think it's like the thing I'm thinking about is like, because it's easier for people to like sit in their room and buy clothes on the metaverse, do you feel like maybe people will stop doing that?
I also don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing if people buy less clothes in real life.
No,
so
I mean, it's not necessarily buying clothes, but it's also like going to shows like
yeah.
You do it and you realize it.
Sorry, guys, people can't hear you on the live stream. So if you could summarize your point very quickly, we can then kind of relate back. So you're saying, is there a difference between the physical identity and a digital one? Is there something lost in the digital sphere when you do that? Okay.
There's a great quote from William Gibson, which is, what our grandchildren will find most quaint about us is that we distinguish the digital from the real, right? And I think like kind of this is where the world is going. Information is really easy to connect with other folks. I think for some people that's a huge value add. For people who have like kind of off fringe and are more creative, it might be an easier way for them to find people who they relate to better. But I, for one, having just spent the last 2 years cooped up, cannot wait to go to Harrods and go and break out my credit card and be like, please take my fiat currency. And
ask,
so,
like, do you want to receive via email?
Excuse me?
They will ask, like, do you want to receive via email? Like, no,
nope, never. Physical receipts. So I mean, like, as much as I spend basically all of my career on the internet, I still crave like physical experiences. I still crave like, I don't always find it very comfortable to go out and like try to look nice, but like it's always worth it when I see a friend and I like smile at them and it's not, in 2D. So I mean, I think that's a very human connection. I don't think that's going to erase it, but what I do think is nice is like the ability to self-express in a way that's almost costless to do, in a way that would have taken, it was you kids don't remember, but it was kind of lonely before the internet allowed you to like talk to everyone all the time. And some of that
high school reunions were for.
Yeah, like some of that loneliness is good because like it forces you to read books and stuff. But some of it's very it exacerbates a lot of the mental health issues that it cuts both ways, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think as well they're not mutually exclusive. So brands are definitely looking at ways to have virtual stores for physical goods or digital twins of outfits so that you can express yourself in the physical world, but then also express yourself in the same way in a metaverse experience. So I think
I read an article about how like kids tease other kids for their skins in Fortnite not being posh enough, and I was like, wow, kids are truly assholes everywhere. Like that is
that's
like,
not a metaverse thing.
We can't deprogram that.
Sorry, there was one more question.
No, you had a question.
I can take it offline if that's easiest.
No,
If it's quick, we're good.
no, do share.
Well, basically, I wanted to understand how real estate would work in the real world in comparison to the metaverse, because I know Andrew mentioned or some other that if Chanel buys a store in the metaverse, there will be increased incentive for another, say, retail or newcomer to buy that space around it. But that exists in real life with commercial leases, so taking advantage of foot traffic, like a Target, for example, can sell to Victoria's Secret based on the amount of customers that they have going to the store. I just wanted to get a better sense of, do we think that there will be commercial leases in the metaverse as it relates to retail? And how do you think the digital retail space will affect the physical one? Would it be that we only buy in person for necessities?
So what's the value proposition on commercial real estate in the metaverse versus the real world?
Do you want to speak to this, Lucy, or?
I'm not an expert in commercial leases in the metaverse. So.
I feel like I'm going to give I'm not going to give like a good Steelman argument for Andrew's case. Like,
Andrew.
I think like one thing I would think of, a way to frame this is thinking about domain names in the early internet. You have like investment banks that would buy like and squat on domain names, and that was kind of like a digital real estate. A lot of this was I guess undermined by Google being so good at what it does, because all of a sudden like no psychopath like types in like a URL name, like no one types in like the website name, like that's crazy. Like you just Google it and then you're like, oh yeah, that's what I was looking for. So a lot of like the value of like .coms and things like this were a little bit belied by like having really good indexes and searches, or I guess undermined, sorry, by having really good indexes and searches. And my sense is that there's going to be a sort of reckoning akin to that in like the quote unquote metaverse. But it's a very useful tool for people to think of now, and certainly it's helped cryptocurrencies become more relevant. So I can't complain too much, but I would think of that as an analogous comparison. Like you're basically taking space in a virtual milieu.
I'd also be surprised if in the future an emerging brand could buy metaverse real estate or rent it next to Chanel. I think that maybe wouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
If it was to mirror the real world.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much to everyone who came. Thank you to Kathleen, Lucy, Andrew. Rest in peace. And my co-host, Mimi.
Yeah. Thank you, Amon. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
Also, thank you to Jeremy Pope for sponsoring this event. Would be remiss to not say that. SCP, if you have not signed in, please sign in. Stay open.